This is a review of the fifth lesson, which is horizontal transformations. The main thing you need to know for this unit is that only the variables inside the brackets or under the square root sign apply to horizontal transformations. The following three equations are the equations that we use throughout the unit. The first one applies to any base function, the second one is for quadratic functions, and the third one is for root functions. In all of the equations, the part inside the bracket or under the square root sign is k and x minus d, which means the only variables that will affect horizontal transformations are k, which is a horizontal stretch or compression, and d, which is a horizontal translation. Something you need to remember for this unit is that everything that applies to horizontal transformations is always the opposite. So for k, you would use the reciprocal or the factor, and for d, you would use the opposite sign. In this case, k equals 3, so you would actually use 1 over 3, and d is negative 2, so you would change the sign to positive 2. For a summary of what the variables mean. A is a vertical stretch or compression. To determine if it's a stretch or compression, you need to remember that if the value of A is less than 1, it's a vertical compression, and if it's greater than 1, it's a vertical stretch. You also need to remember that if the value of A is less than 0, then it's a reflection in the x-axis. K is a horizontal stretch or compression. To determine if it's a stretch or compression, it's easier to use the factor or the reciprocal, which is 1 over k. For example, in this equation, k equals 3, and the factor or the reciprocal is 1 over 3. Since 1 over 3 is less than 1, it's a horizontal compression. If it was greater than 1, it would be a horizontal stretch. And also, if k is less than 0, then there's a reflection in the y-axis. D is a horizontal shift, and you need to remember to change the sign. For example, in this question, d is negative 2, so you would actually use positive 2. If the value is positive, the horizontal translation is to the right, and if it's negative, the horizontal translation is to the left. Lastly, C is a vertical shift. For this value, you don't need to change the signs. So if the value is positive, it's a vertical translation up, and if it's negative, it's a vertical translation down. Now I'm going to show you some examples. For the first example, it asks you to write an equation using the transformations that are given. So in this equation, there's a vertical compression by a factor of 1 over 3, a horizontal stretch by a factor of 2, a reflection in the x-axis, a reflection in the y-axis, 2 units to the left, and 9 units up. So to get the equation for this question, first you need to write down which variable is which. So a is 1 over 3, and since there's a reflection in the x-axis, it would be negative. K is 2, and since there's a reflection in the y-axis, it would also be negative. D is 2 units to the left, so it's negative 2, and C is 9 units up, so it's positive 9. If you sub in the values into the equation, you would get y equals negative 1 over 3 times negative 1 over 2, x plus 2, and plus 9. Since k is negative 2, you would sub it into the equation by changing it to a negative 1 over 2. And since d is negative 2, you would change the sign and put in positive 2. In the next example, it asks you to write how the equation would be obtained. The equation given is y equals 3 square root 5x plus 10 and minus 5. Something you need to remember is that x always has to be on its own in the equation. Since it says 5x, you have to factor before you answer the question. When you factor out the 5, the new equation you get is y equals 3 square root 5 x plus 2 minus 5. You would then use this new equation to answer the question. So this equation would be obtained by a vertical stretch by a factor of 3, a horizontal compression by a factor of 1 over 5, a horizontal translation 2 units to the left, and a vertical translation 5 units down. For this next question, we will write how the equation would be obtained and also how to graph it. So the equation is y equals negative 3 times negative 2 x minus 2 squared and plus 4. For how the equation would be obtained, there is a reflection in the x-axis, a vertical stretch by a factor of 3, a reflection in the y-axis, a horizontal compression by a factor of 1 over 2, a horizontal shift 2 units to the right, and a vertical shift 4 units up. If you were asked to graph this function, you would write down the key points for a parabola since it is a quadratic function. To get the new values, you would multiply x by negative 1 over 2 and add 2, and you would multiply y by negative 3 and add 4. To get the new points, you would substitute the key points for a parabola into these equations and use the new points to graph the function.